Yo, what's up guys? Another tier list, and this is going to be the second to last one. There's going to be one more after this of my most wanted LD5s. That is the most biased list going to be out there. But first of all, a 2A tier list. And I wanted to do this one different than I did all of my previous tier lists before. And the reason for that is very specific. A 2A is really more based on like when do you want to build each one. Like sure, some of them you don't have to build at all, but some of them, especially on earlier game accounts, you have to build in certain orders. So I'm actually going to be ranking them by their certain content that they're good for and which order I would recommend to use them in. For that reason, I will be changing these tiers to just like whatever content it is. And then the left to right will matter for in which order I recommend you to build them. This, of course, can vary a little bit between certain units, and I will also mention that. But for that reason, I'm actually going to be filling in the whole tier list first, making the whole tier list, and then explaining it rather than what I've normally been doing, picking in like one by one of the units. Because then it would be a lot of back and forth, like is A earlier built than B and that kind of stuff. And in this case, I just kind of want to have like a setup where I would say, this is the order I would recommend new people to build them in. If you want to start focusing on PvP, this is the recommended order that I would recommend to build them in. Sure, it does depend on like having certain units, but let's just see how that goes. Maybe it's a bad idea, maybe it's a good idea, but let's see how that tier list would look like. And first I would fill in that whole tier list. That does also mean that the top tier is not necessarily like the best tier. No, it's just like whatever you want to focus on first. Okay, so this is going to be the tier list as is. I might change a little bit of things here and there, but I will explain why I put units in a certain order. I will go from top left to bottom right. And I will also explain where I would use them, how I would use them, and why I placed them earlier than some other units, for example. So, starting off top left, I think Spectra is the first one to 2A for pretty much every account. It is the best installed for the Dragons team. It's a very good unit for TOA as well. And with the Dragons team, let's say the Vert, Varimal, Spectra with a Lauren and then +1, I would say Tyron is probably the fast or the best for a lowest rune requirement run. If you have a little bit more speed and everything already, you could go for a Crow in there as well. But that is by far your easiest Giants team, or not Giants, Dragons team that you can do. And you can actually have that within like 6 to 12 hours of your gameplay. It is really easy to get. I have showcased that a few times on different accounts, but Spectra is really enabling that. Plus, it's really good for TOA things as well. So it's just an overall really good early pick that you could go for. So I would recommend to go everyone for a Spectra first, Crow second. Reason for that is it's really good in all of the Rift Beasts. It's good in R5. It's good in Giants, so you can actually use it for Giants. I was actually thinking about maybe placing the Shannon and the Baladion because it's really good for Giants as well, but it's more optional. You could actually keep them as a non-2-8 version and still have great success with those. So it's not really a must in there to have it in there. So then for PvE, I would say so you have Dragons figured out, you have Giants figured out. Then I would say next thing that you mostly figure out is the Necro, PC, and SF. So in that case, for the case of Necro, I would say that these three units are all really good for Necro. So the Rogue, the Shaman, and the Siren. I would say Ikaru is technically still better for a lot of people than the Siren, but then you need the threshold on the Ikaru to get enough defense to go for the 4 multi-hit, or well, for the 3 like team-up kind of thing. So therefore, I might say that the Siren is a little bit easier to build for some people. However, I would still get an Ikaru if you want to transition into R5 or any of the Beast Raids or any of that kind of stuff. Naomi, I kind of placed in here, which is kind of like, okay, you could go for it, but to be honest, that is also more of an R5 unit. And if you want to go first slow R5, I would recommend to go that. Sure, she's also good in Giants, but I think she's not really a must for Giants at all. So I would rather just go for a Crow and grows more first stuff or a lot of stuff, and then you could go for Naomi later. However, Naomi could maybe place in around here as well. It kind of depends on how and what route you want to go for. Then next up, I went for units that are great for SF. I would say that Zinc is a must for SF. The Gina is more of a late game unit for SF. If you want to make an SF speed team, so Steel Fortress speed team, then Gina becomes interesting. Is also a RTA unit if you want to go for Special League RTA, but besides that, it's not really that much for it. Then afterward, there are a bunch of units. I actually, would say that these don't really matter too much in order if you do want to use them. Colleen is still used in R5, but doesn't really need that 2A, but it is an option to go for the 2A. maybe might be a little bit better to 2A for an earlier game account. Would that be? Yeah, for that reason, I'm actually going to make Colleen a little bit further to the left because she is actually really good for an early game R5 account. So, and I think you go for R5 earlier than you really go focusing on SF and PC. And Nickel in this case is the PC unit. Then afterward, we have a few more units. First of all, the Iron. Iron is really good in very specific dungeons, as in the Dimensional Raid. It is kind of a must-have over there because it's one of the few things that just goes straight through the shield. And you pretty much would need him over there, but if you don't really tend to farm that content, which personally I never do. So you could skip on him. Sia, you could skip on. Shannon, you could skip on. Paladin, you could skip on. But I would say make at least one of all of these units at the top. Would I recommend any duplicates on any of them? Personally, not. In current state, a lot of the PvE units, you can only throw one per PvE unit, so therefore that reason, duplicates, it's not going to be that interesting. Then we have RTA. We actually only have Iselin for a straight-up RTA. Technically could be used in Siege as well, but it's not as great of a Siege unit, I would say. I've seen it being used in some scenarios of Arena Offense as a stripper, but there's definitely better options out there as well. But this is the only one which I would say, like, okay, I wouldn't really use it in combined PvP. Maybe I could remove this whole tab of RTA and just put it in combined RTA or a combined PvP, because these units kind of are like more of Arena Offense / RTA units as well. But most of the 2As, they're not really that interesting for RTA. Might you say Siren is decent for RTA? It is, but only if you have very specific LD5s that do actually fit with it, such as a Han or a Zeratul or any of kind of those insane team-up units to lower cooldowns, then yes, sure, it's really good. But without that, I don't really recommend to go this for an RTA unit in the first place. So let's go from there. So then we have for Siege, I would say Kali is probably the most interesting for Siege, however, is easily replaced by an Adriana or even a Praline. So, but that is definitely a good one for just the attack buff, a nuke, a speed buff. There's just a whole bunch of going on her kit. That makes it very good. Second off, Vigor. Vigor is just overall still strong in defense. Not as common anymore on defense as it used to be, but still decent amounts that we see on defense, such as currently like a Mir with a Kiklet and then a Vigor or something. Could be both speedy, could be both Vio, could be both high damage, could be both all kinds of stuff for Siege defense. But also for Siege offense, there's just a plethora of way that you can use it. You can use a Bruiser, you can use it to speed up a Miang, and then you Miang just one-shot something. There's just a whole bunch of ways to deal with that. Then next up we have the Jolton, which is still one of the better dark tanks out there if the enemy doesn't have any form of sustain. And they will have a few light units in there. Jolton will just kill it by the passive most of the time. So you just want to build Jolton super high HP. And that's all there is to that Jolton. So that's definitely still a nice unit that I do see being used in Siege a decent amount of times. And Lucia used to be very meta. Same for Lulu for just like the support role in the Bruiser style of Siege. But nowadays, I would say, especially in like higher end of Siege, you definitely see a lot more like instant nukes, or you don't really want to go too much RNG value on this. And these, like, sure, they're nice, but you're kind of waiting for like, okay, if I don't get too hard procced on, I will definitely win. But if I get super hard procced on, these might not be the best in slot. However, in low ranks of Siege, definitely still very good units on just being tanky, surviving, healing up their team, and going from there. Tractor, kind of same thing. Used to be a very strong in meta unit for Siege, but currently it's not really fitting that much that often. A lot of the times other units are just simply better. So I would say Tractor, it's still useful to get in Siege, but it's not like an insane unit for it anymore. Most of the time you want to still do the damage from the multi-hits. Defense scaling, you cannot get armor broken, decent tank in that, and all of that kind of good stuff. Shren is also a good nuker, has a little bit more survivability or a good amount of survivability compared to the Kali, but doesn't have the attack buff, doesn't have speed buff, does need that from another unit. You could actually pair that together with Kali to actually go for the snipe that way, but there's just a few options out there for it. Chacha I see from time to time as a counter for, well, just very specific things. I'm not even sure what it's used for these days anymore. I would say maybe these days it's not even used that much. But I think from here, we kind of go into the units that are no longer really used as much. I'm actually going to lower this one a little bit down, because from here we kind of go into the Siege niche counters that you don't see all too much anymore. I think I'll actually one-up the two of you, because I think in early game, Copper and Bulldozer is still used a bit. But in late game, it's too hard to get a Copper Bulldozer team in, because you just simply have so many strong things on defense, mostly speed leads, speed awakenings, speeds, comps, like in the first place, everything is swift, and then it's hard to outspeed with a copper dozer that you cannot really go for the nukes. But if they so happen to fit that you can go for the nukes, it's still pretty nice. We have this thing, which is the Royd. Is a decent bruiser, but once again, bruisers, there are definitely better bruisers out there than this thing. Driller, sometimes seen on defense, but also not crazy good. I think this thing is called May, which is also, once again, a decent to niche-ish kind of siege unit, but it's also kind of on the point, like, yeah, it destroys HP, nice and all, but most of the defense that you see, there's not really like a Molly on defense then you would use against that, or just like a Skogo on defense. Like, sure, maybe in lower ranks you see that a little bit, but in higher ranks you're not really going to see units that you would like to use this against. It's more like insta-cleaves rather than the really bruiser fights. And I would say that these are all kind of more bruiser fight units. Ramagol, same thing. I would say that the Ursa in a very specific team with, let's say, something along the lines of the, what's it called? The Conrad, it might be interesting, but that is a lot more late game. So for the ordering of when I would 2A them, he comes in very late because he's probably not even going to be used. And then we have like these two units also not really used that much. So for what my recommendation is of what I recommend people to get for 2As for Siege, I would definitely get the first 6, maybe the first 7, and then maybe already go for repeats of those rather than going further down the line. That is my recommendation for like, okay, I want to be focusing on Siege. What unit should I be focusing on? I would recommend the first 6 and especially the first 2. And then afterward, it's getting a little bit more niche of like, okay, where can you get them? However, keep in mind, combined PvP does also have a few that are very good for Siege. So maybe some of those should actually overtake it, such as the Asher, because the Asher, I put it in combined PvP, but it would actually be like maybe number 1 or number 2 in Siege as well. But since Asher is that good for also normal arena and also for RTA, which is actually, I would say, the only RTA 2A that you see very commonly. All of the other 2As you don't see for RTA. So if you do want to focus on RTA, I would definitely say Asher is your right pick in that. Then besides that, Seth, maybe not necessarily for RTA, but more for like the normal arena. The dot team is very oppressive, still very strong. So that's definitely a good one. Also for RTA or for Siege, if the enemy doesn't have any form of cleanse and you go with a Seth and a train and then some support kind of unit, it's absolutely still a very strong team with all of that dots going in. So yeah, you have to keep in mind with the Seth, however, that he has to go 15 crit rate if you want to use him for the arena offense dot team. That is very important. For the Asher, once again, could be both many ways. But what we often see in RTA is that you want to go for crit rate 4, because crit rate 4 does do a lot of damage the moment that you do hit on an armor break. Moving on next, Bernard is more siege offense. You can use it in normal arena as well. But most of the time in normal arena, especially in higher ranks, you do see more Asher because of the higher base speed. But in lower ranks, I definitely do think with Bernard you can get away with that. Thrain, once again, is mentioned for a whole bunch of things. Is also very good in TOA. Same for Seth, actually. But it's also very good. It's good in Siege. It's good in RTA. Well, good in RTA. It's an okay unit in RTA. If you don't have a Rika yet, you can definitely go for a Thrain in there. So it definitely has a bunch of options. Megan, arena offense, siege offense, simple attack bar boost, blah, blah, blah. You know how it works. You make a Lucian move, you make a Bethany move, you make anyone move, and then they go for a one-shot. So definitely useful unit in there. Miho is still slightly used here and there if you're fighting an RTA team or a siege team, which pretty much has guaranteed crit on the whole team. Then it's still usable to have that Miho ruined. Simply because, well, if she only gets crit, she doesn't die, so which is pretty nice. And then we go more into the niche units. I would say, like, if you're hitting a lot of debuffs, might do a lot of damage, but it's not really great. Jumaline is actually one of those niche damage dealers that if you don't have a good AoE damage dealer yet, it might be your one to pick up for arena offense or even siege. They also have a good amount of damage by itself, but then again, it's the moment you get any net 5 that's an AoE damage dealer, it's probably better than that one. Rebecca, with the recent buff, some people did say it's kind of becoming a Valor Jewel, but I don't really see it personally to become like a free-to-play Valor Jewel on that. It does have immunity the moment that you actually cleanse, but the moment you don't cleanse, you don't have immunity. Kind of not that great, I would say. And then we have Crane, which I would say is pretty good in combination with Laura, but then we're talking pretty far end game. So for that reason, I put it all the way at the end as well. For dupes, or like multiple, I would say that Asher and Megan are options for multiple. Any of the others you could say if you use multiple Bernards for Siege, then you could go for multiple of those. But I would say these are kind of the options that I would recommend to go for. Then we would also have the next one for other PvE things, mainly TOA. It's just a bunch of units. I wouldn't really recommend to go for those because they're not really that great, in all honesty. You simply have like your Tyrone, you have like Seth and Train are actually like, or Seth and Train are way better than these three already. So I would just go for Seth, Train, and for your Tyrone, Verd, Lauren, Varamos, those kind of units if you want to focus on TOA. And I wouldn't necessarily really focus on those in the first place. So Seth and Thrain are the ways to go for like PvE or for PvE other things, but couldn't really put them in double. That would have been kind of like weird. They're not used, but could be niche. There's just a whole bunch of them out there. These are kind of the units like, sure, if you have their specific spot where you do already know where you want to use them, they could be used, but in most cases, I wouldn't really recommend on 2Aing those, and I wouldn't really recommend to focusing on those. Sure, there's definitely a bunch of them in there that you might say like, oh, but I like to use this for the counter, or I like to use Mina for a weird one-shot somewhere, or I have Darien as a tank. Yes, they could all be used, but I wouldn't really recommend that. You could say like, oh, Darien is a good arena defense tank. No, it's not. It does make himself get way too much damage, and then you're like super open to a bung beak or other things, or they just reset it, or it's kind of a dead slot where it's just like, okay, the other things survive a little bit better, but he doesn't, and you might as well put something in there that's actually useful. And then there's a few of them that I would not recommend to 2A. Does not mean that you're not going to use those units. It just means that you're not just simply not going to 2A those units, and that's just the main thing. What would I say I would give for also like, okay, you got to skill them up. Are there anything that you would make duplicates of simply just skill up? Well, let me actually go through a few of them because I'm not 100% sure which one do have like very interesting skill ups, but I will point out the ones that I say are interesting for skilling up if you do want to go for them. First of all, the Spectral, I definitely recommend to skill up at least for the cooldown decrease over here. That is very important. Same for the Shaman, get this cooldown decrease in here. It just adds in so much more damage. So those are definitely two units I would recommend to get skill up. You could do that by dupes of 2As. You could also do that by Delphmonts. Kind of depends on how you would like to do that. Raoak and also Crow are semi-interesting to skill up, mainly because they have a higher chance of armor breaking on their skill 1, which is also the case for Ikaru. So if you do... Oh, wait, for Ikaru, it's actually not the case. So it's mainly just Crow and Raoak, or the other way around. Those are the two you do want to skill up, mainly for this extra harmful effect stuff, while the skill 3 doesn't. A little bit of damage. Damage is never that bad, I would definitely say that, but I would definitely say that the harmful effect rate for extra chance of armor breaking is really good. Zinc is also one of those for the skill 2, the harmful effect rate. In Steel Fortress, this is pretty much needed to be there on a higher level, so Zinc I would recommend to skill up as well. Siren, the moment that you use her for RTA, I would skill her up because of higher chance of death breaking. If it's just in SF, it's not really that much of a must, but you could do it. If you're just using for Necro, you could do it, but it's not really that much of a must. Gina is definitely one of those. If you do want to use it to the best extent, you have to skill her up mainly for that skill 3 extra harmful effect rate, but mainly even the cooldown. The cooldown and the damage is definitely the thing that she needs to just clear the waves a bit faster and everything. Any of the other units in PvE would not really recommend to skill them up. Sure, it would do better if you have, but it's not really a must. Then for RTA and Siege, I do want to actually mention that all of these units perform better with skill ups. Kali might miss a little bit of damage and therefore not kill. Vigor might not give enough damage and therefore not kill. Jilton, I would say, is not really that much of a must to skill up because if he's mainly just the tank out there, you don't really need the other effects. But any of the other units, if you do want to use them effective, I would recommend then to scale them up. Same thing for Seth, Thrain, Asher as well. Those units, I highly recommend to scale them up if you do want to use them effectively. Bernard, if you don't insta-clear on the just whatever your nukers are going to do, Bernard skill ups are very useful. Bernard actually does do a lot of damage. Megan, however, could decide not to. It's a little bit less interesting. And then for all of the units further that not mentioned, you don't really have to go for skill ups unless you're planning to use them a lot. The more you use a unit, the more you can think about like, hey, maybe skill ups could be useful. But definitely I would say everything for RTA related or PvP related or Siege related or just even Arena related. If you're using a unit and you want to use it to the best extent, you do have to skill it up. For PvP or for PvE, you can slack on a few here and there, and then it's kind of like decided like, okay, do you use it enough? Do you care about a little bit extra speed? Do you care about the armor break landing a little bit more often? Then you could skill those up, but it's not really that much of a must. It's just more of a choice. In PvP, you want to win, and not skilling up might make you lose. Well, guys, that's all for this tier list. It is a bit shorter than the other ones. I think that this was pretty useful for people to see in what order I would recommend to do your 2As. If you did enjoy this kind of video, please let me know in the comments and like this video. And see you as always in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab for the guide video archive, which contains all of the guides that you might need. Hope to see you there.